So welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance for a global audience. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damian. How's everything?
Good. We're going to have a challenging Sunday, you and me.
We do indeed. It's going to be interesting, without a doubt.
Yeah, well, I hope it's going to be a good game, and that Mexicans treat the English fans with respect and kindness.
It's going to be interesting to see that.
Well, anyway, so this week we have a great interview with Rafael García. Rafael is the Vice President of External Relations at TC Energy. TC Energy is among Mexico's largest private energy infrastructure operators, more than $5 billion of assets here, mainly focused on natural gas pipelines that are critical to electricity generation, industrial supply, and so on. Rafael is also president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce here in Mexico, and he'll talk, in addition, a little bit about Mexico-Canadian business relations. And Eduardo, I think this week we can touch on USMCA, some developments that the market's mostly shrugged off. We have the end of the first half of the year, so we could talk about some stock movers. Some news stories about how Tulum is doing very poorly this year, and something on Constellation Brands and Mexico's MIllionaires, according to UBS. Does that sound good?
Sounds fair enough to me.
Okay, so if you want, we can start with USMCA. As was expected, on July the 1st, the US said that they weren't going to automatically renew for another 16 years the treaty, the trade agreement between Mexico, US, and Canada, but instead we will automatically go to a period of multi-year reviews for as long as 10 years, unless, of course, the three countries reach an agreement in the meantime to go to a 16-year extension. So basically, we have 10-year automatic renewal with reviews, with the possibility of reaching some kind of deal, this year, next year, or whenever it might be over the next 10 years, that then would lead to the 16-year extension, and then be 16 years beyond that if the same process is followed. As I said, this was expected. The Mexico, Ebrard had telegraphed this. The US had telegraphed this. Trump wasn't just going to rubber stamp USMCA for another 16 years. And we saw that in the market reaction. I mean, the peso weakened a little bit, but that was probably more to do with comments from the Fed. The dollar was strong across the board. But, nearshoring companies like Vesta, Fibra Monterrey, or Banorte, all were up on the news. So there was nothing particularly surprising for people who follow this closely, even if some people who don't follow it closely, because they're probably better things to do, were initially a little bit alarmed by some of the headlines. So I think now there's another round of talks on July the 20th, I think. Now, Mexico's goal is to try and get a treaty and move away from these multi-year reviews that can obviously contribute to uncertainty and deter investment, which is what Mexico badly needs. And to get a deal, I think there's different things that need to be sorted out. I mean, one is that even though there's a USMCA treaty in place as we speak, the US has imposed tariffs on several sectors, even if those sectors are compliant with the USMCA. So these are the famous Section 232, so national security concern tariffs. And, these are significant because although it's quite complex, Mexico can end up paying, 25% tariff on the non-US value added of a car, even if that car is USMCA compliant. And they can also pay 50% on steel and aluminium because of 232. So while everyone says, which is strictly speaking accurate, 85% of Mexican exports to the US are USMCA compliant, as much as 30 percentage points of that 85% are kind of cars and car part related, and depending on exactly what the product is, potentially subject to 232 tariffs. So it's not the case that 85% of Mexico exports to the US are currently tariff free. So Mexico wants the 232 to be lifted, and maybe the US will do that and incorporate tariffs in the treaty itself. And Ebrard has talked about what Mexico's looking for isn't necessarily, or what Mexico would accept isn't necessarily tariff-free exports, but lower tariffs than other countries currently face. Because the irony is that on cars, depending on the configurations and the US value added, Mexico could potentially be paying 25% tariff, whereas Japan and Europe are only paying a 15% tariff. So in cars, which has really become one of the key areas of weakness in the Mexican economy when it comes to investment and exports, at least, Mexico might even, in some cases, not in all cases, be at a disadvantage versus other countries. I think the other, and this may get worse because the US is also now talking about Section 301 tariffs, which might be 10% for supposedly violating labor standards, and that could happen any day soon. That apparently wouldn't cover USMCA compliant goods, but it would nonetheless be negative. So we're not necessarily limiting ourselves to 232. There are other potential tariffs on the horizon. So the other issue, I think, is the rules of origin and whether those should be raised in order to be USMCA compliant. So for cars right now, it's 75, and there's talk about it moving to 81, 82%. And then the US, in addition to that, apparently wants USA minimum content to be USMCA compliant for cars, at least, which is 50%. Mexico is obviously, and Canada are obviously opposing that. And then in addition to all of that, you have the US apparently is putting pressure on Mexico to mimic US tariffs on Chinese imports so that China doesn't gain a foothold in Mexico, not only as a backdoor into the US, but as a displacement of US exports to Mexico. So some kind of common trade agreement, even if there isn't going to be a common market, apparently is also part of it. So there's a lot on the table, and this we will find out whether the treaty gets renewed for the 16 years as part of an agreement. Seems kind of unlikely right now. Whether we'll move to these sort of annual reviews and side agreements and sorting out some but not all of the issues, and then of course there's always the possibility that that the US would withdraw. Though most experts think that isn't likely. What's your take, Eduardo?
I have two elements to add to what you just said, Damian. Basically, is that the way it is, as we had talked, it was expected. The markets didn't react that much. I'm just worried about the fact that the US has the possibility of, at any moment, still canceling the agreement, which is unlikely, but it's not necessarily nil. The probability is not nil because you never know what Trump might do in the next 2 or 3 years that he's still in power. And if he loses the midterms and gets angry and gets frustrated and whatever, you never know what that might do to the agreement and to his own antagonistic view of free trade. And the other thing that makes me still worried is the fact that they still use the language that they need to reduce the trade deficit with Mexico and Canada. And we know that trade deficits are not related to tariffs or not. It's like when you have a headache and you think that with an aspirin you will cure yourself, but you have a deeper problem in your body. It's the same with trade deficits. Trade deficits are a factor of savings, investment, fiscal policy, many other complex things that Trump doesn't seem to understand and get. And I understand that it's not easy to get those, but I'm worried that that language or that view on what the trade is about is very much present in the US government. That might make it harder for this agreement to continue as we know it. I know maybe nothing happens. Trump gets not voted out, he can't be reelected or whatever, a new president comes in. But all the antagonism that America faces, or that many Americans feel about trade without really knowing the trade has also created jobs, lowered inflation, increased the productivity of the region. Still an uphill battle, I think. So even though this was expected and nothing has changed, I'm still a little bit worried about the future of the trade agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone would accept that there are risks on the horizon. That said, I think the business community is still very relevant in Trump's overall sort of coalition, and they're pushing hard for continuation of NAFTA, of USMCA rather. And secondly, the consumer, the US consumer, which is the US voter, would lose from this as car prices would go up and other products that Mexico produces would go up, agriculture. And thirdly, Mexico is now the largest importer of US goods, and there are a lot of constituencies in the US that would suffer if Mexico in return put similar types of tariffs on US goods, especially corn and agricultural goods from the US in key states in the Midwest. So I think everything's possible. One has to manage scenarios. And the most likely scenario is that the agreement continues, and that's what the markets are saying. But I agree with you. With Trump, it's difficult to make absolutely any kind of prediction with a lot of confidence.
Correct.
So we move on to Tulum. Did you get a chance to see the story in front page of Reformer saying basically that tourism is down this year, and attributing it to insecurity, violence, the sargassum, this seaweed that's kind of ruined a lot of the beaches in the Caribbean, and also the strong peso, and I think also a little bit lack of planning. I don't know if you've been to Tulum, but there's been a sort of lot of kind of hotels popping up left, right, and center. Very little infrastructure investment in roads and water and generation to support the kind of growth that it's had. So it's kind of premium pricing. You can end up paying $1,000 for a room in Tulum, depending where you stay, but there isn't, premium infrastructure. And, on top of that, you have, factors that are somewhat outside Tulum's control, which is the sargassum and the strong peso, which doesn't make it better.
Yeah, I don't want to boost our own, but we talked about the decline in the Riviera Maya visiting numbers of tourism and the problems that was facing long ago. This just kind of focuses on Tulum. We didn't focus on Tulum per se, and it sounds quite serious. I did a little bit of research about how the declining visitors, how much occupancy rates were down in Tulum versus other areas. And interesting enough, the occupancy rate of Tulum, which it's around 73%, has fallen further than most other tourist destinations in Mexico, with the exception of Acapulco, but that's due to other natural phenomena. But if you look at Puerto Vallarta, if you look at Mazatlan, if you look at Cabos, they're all with greater occupancy rates than Tulum. So I think it's quite worrisome for that particular region of Mexico, which was beautiful. It was pristine. It was gorgeous with its archaeological site next to these beautiful beaches. Haven't been in Tulum for a long time, but it sounds like it's a bit of a environmental disaster, not so much because of the sargassum, which it is, but that's not related to the municipality of Tulum, but the way that it's grown, the extortion that's taking place, the way that there has been no planning or not any sensible development of the region. It's making it lose its shine, and against other tourist areas of Mexico is declining faster. I saw that visitors are still growing a little bit according to the Data Sur, which is the government's statistical reference point, but it's growing only 1.2% versus Cancun growing 5 point something. Mazatlan, Puerto Vallarta, Cabos are also growing at a faster rate. So it's quite sad to see this. I don't think it's completely lost. I think they could, like any other place, it could reinvent it and be grow and could grow again at a stronger pace than it's apparently growing right now, for the benefit of the local industry, tourism industry, and for the benefit of the country.
Yeah, I mean, I've been, as you know, in Mexico for 30 years, and every year since the mid 90s, people have said Tulum is ruined. And then the next year, Tulum would reach new records of tourism. And for some people, that is the definition of Tulum being ruined. Lots of people going there, or maybe for most people. But now, clearly, we've reached a turning point in that growth has stopped. As sort of the airport group, it's been affected by this. It's been affected by overall tourism to the Caribbean down, and then of course there's a new airport in Tulum which isn't owned by Azur, which has siphoned off traffic. But they reported April traffic numbers. I think international traffic was down 3%, domestic traffic was down 2%. The stock is down for the year, and it's underperformed the other airports. So it's clearly got some negative exposure to the region, even if it also is these days in Colombia, South America, Puerto Rico, and the US. The Caribbean is still its most important market. So it's been a problem for it. The lack of appetite for Mexico Caribbean tourism for the reasons that we mentioned. If we move on, if we talking about stock performance, we're now obviously in the second half of the year. So I thought it might be a good time to look at some of the big moves in the stock market for the first 6 months, which I think do give some indications of what's going on in the economy and what sectors are hot, what are not hot, and so on. So overall, and especially in the case of the first half, because the market was quite modest. The increase, it was up about 4.5% as of July the 1st. So it was, unlike last year, there wasn't like a big rally, but within that relatively stable market, your favorite stock, Diablos, the baseball team, was, according to my data, was the top performer in all of Mexico, was up 71%. You'll probably know why. I believe they were champions in 2024, 2025. That presumably played a part.
They were the champions, and as we've talked before, I think the interest of the public in baseball is growing because of new facilities. I mean, the stadium, like I've said, and I haven't invited you because I haven't been in Mexico, but I will soon. It's gorgeous. I've just heard that apparently the other team that Alfredo Harp Luf's family owns in Oaxaca just opened a new stadium, and they've told me that it's also fantastic. So I think the Diablos franchise is growing, and the stock probably reflects this greater interest that the public is facing now with the World Cup right now. I think baseball is a little bit on everybody's mind in the second tier, but that doesn't mean that people are still not enjoying baseball in other parts of Mexico. So I think it's a reflection of how well the brand is being administered over the past a few years, I would say, not just over the past 6 months. And hopefully baseball will continue growing. Mexican players are moving to the major leagues in the US. So it's a welcoming development, I would say, for the sports industry in Mexico, that we have now another industry that is growing at a fast pace.
Yeah, I mean, the bad news, looking at the data for the fans, is ticket prices have gone up, which seems to be a generalized phenomenon in sports and music. So the average price, I think last year was up about 20%. So I think total tickets was only up about 5 or 6%. So the improvement in the numbers are driven a lot by price increases. But as you said, you've got this new stadium, and the interesting thing about the stadium is it's also being used now for music concerts, so which is another new kind of additional revenue source. And Mexico's after the US, I think the largest market for live music in the world, or one of them at least. And Billie Eilish was there in November 2025. And Maroon is coming later this year, Maroon 5. So there's some big names coming or being there, which I think is also helping. Another stock that did really well is Fibra Nova. Fibra Nova is an industrial REIT, very strong in Chihuahua and Ciudad Juarez. Owns industrial parks. Its sponsor is another big, very successful Mexican company, Bafar, so it does a lot of the industrial real estate for Bafar itself, but also for third-party multinational clients. And that stock was up 60%, and it's mainly. I think the decline in interest rates has helped Fibras overall, but in the case specifically of Fibra Nova, there's a lot of expansion in industrial parks expected. So HR Ratings is looking at revenues growing from 1.3 billion pesos in 2024 to over 3 billion pesos in 2029. So almost tripling their revenue count over a 5-year period. So that's another one that's done well. Grupo Mexico, copper prices remain pretty firm. They're up another 15% after doubling last year. On the other hand, Peñoles, which was up, several 100% last year because of booming silver prices, took a decline of 19% as silver prices came down a bit. Banks did well, even though rates came down. Banbajío, who lost its CEO to Banamex, they were up 24%. Banorte was up 14%. I think banking, people had already expected rates to come down. Banks generally reported good numbers, good loan growth. And on the negative side, you saw some consumer names do poorly. The Mexican economy obviously isn't growing as fast as people hoped. So Chedraui was down 27%. Now they have big operations in Southern California, which got, I think, hit by the immigration crackdown in the US. Soriana was down 26%. Another big supermarket retailer, of course. Cuervo, the tequila company, impacted by less appetite for tequila spirits in the US, and also a strong peso obviously hurts it, given that it makes all its tequila in Mexico. And Ardes, which did very well last year as it spun off operations, also was down significantly down, I think 30% or so. So these are, but you need to adjust that for the spin-off, so it's probably a bit misleading. So overall, a good first half for Mexico. Some interesting kind of small caps did especially well, some less well, reflecting what's going on in the Mexican economy.
Just to add to the list that you just mentioned, from the ones that are in the index, in the Mexican index, the main index, Orbia did very well as well, 45% almost. It had been doing very poorly, so I think it's a natural rebound. FEMSA didn't do that bad for the first half of the year with a 22% rise. And on the other hand, Gentera, the micro lending bank and company, fell as well a little bit, like 18%. So yeah, a mixed bag, but overall, I think it was a positive first half for the market.
And talking about the impact of the US crackdown on non-documented migration in the US, Constellation Brands, which probably everyone knows, they sell Grupo Modelo's beer in the US, among other assets. So they sell Corona, Pacifico, Victoria, Modelo Especial. And about 50% of their market in the US is to Hispanics drinking Mexican beer. And about another 50% is Anglos drinking Mexican beer. And Modelo Especial sort of overtook, and I think still the number one beer in the US. It overtook Bud Light after Bud Light's kind of marketing problems a couple of years back. But they also suffered, although perhaps not as much as the market expected from this crackdown. It's said they reported they have a kind of complicated fiscal year, but they reported sales down 3% in the quarter that has just come. They also said that their huge plant that they're building in Veracruz, it's been delayed several times, and costs of been higher than they initially expected. This is the plant that replaced the Mexicali plant that AMLO basically vetoed and called a referendum in Mexicali. And I think very few people voted in the referendum, but they voted against the plant because of concerns about water. Now it's been moved to Veracruz. It's still not finished, and now it was going to be finished in August, and now it seems that it won't be finished until December. And the cost overruns have dragged down the margins a little bit, along with some other issues related to tariffs on aluminium from Mexico. So it's been a challenging time. The stock at one point a couple of years ago was at $250. It's now at $140. So a couple of years ago, everyone was excited about Constellation. Its beer sales were doing really well. The Mexican demographics were then seen as a big positive. And over that 2-year period, thanks to Trump and some other factors, the stock has lost almost half its value. I think the issue is not just that Hispanics suffering from lack of employment opportunities because of this crackdown, but they're also not going out as much and therefore drinking beer because they're afraid of being rounded up. So they're going to less concerts and less bars and so on. So that's also been affecting it. I think cost overruns building $1 billion beer plants is probably to be expected. But clearly they were, although they seem to take it in public very well, they were big losers from AMLO and from having to move this plant from Mexicali to Veracruz, which are two parts of Mexico very far from each other.
Yeah, no doubt that they've had a difficult time over the past few months, year. That decision to cancel the plant in Mexicali was a tough one. I suspect they put a very positive spin on it. They didn't never show their anger against the decision by the administration not to let them finish what they had already started. So there were costs there. I think that the situation with the Hispanic community in the States is a tough one. And if their market there is not going out as much as you said because of fears of being grabbed, sent to a deportation center, and maybe being deported, it's always a tough situation for those groups. Also, I wonder whether the World Cup will be a little bit of a boost because of beer drinking during games, but the rival Ultra got the official sponsoring in America. So I wonder how much Ultra might benefit from that, and Modelo or Constellation, which has the rights to sell the beer in the US from Modelo, might not pick up on the extra demand that the World Cup is bringing.
Yeah, let's hope that Mexico, even though I'm English, wins on Sunday, plays Brazil in Miami, beats Brazil, of course, goes through to the semifinal. I mean, I think we'll meet the US in the final. And if we have a US-Mexico World Cup final, that would be great for Constellation, perhaps.
ECC, right, Damian?
That's right.
I gotta say, in the Azteca, they were selling Modelo and Ultra at the same time. So maybe there is. I'm talking about Mexico, but most of the games have been taking place in the US, so that might help. You were going to say something?
It doesn't help Constellation because they only sell
because it's a local beer
in the US. But yeah, my daughter went on Tuesday and said that several cans of Modelo Especial were thrown on top of her by people she'd never met before. So I
don't get that. I don't get that way of celebrating, to be honest. But anyway,
I went to Aspen, and in Aspen they open bottles of champagne and spray it over people. In the Estadio Azteca, they open Modelo Especial and spray it over people.
Quite a difference.
So just talking about Aspen, last thing for me at least, some good news. Mexico is minting more and more millionaires, US dollar millionaires. There's a new report from UBS, maybe the largest wealth manager in the world, or one of them at least, that Mexico has $333,000 millionaires. That's just below Brazil, which is at 386,000. But Brazil is 50% larger than Mexico. So the fact that they're almost the same number of millionaires means that millionaires per capita are much higher in Mexico than Brazil. And we, according to this report, we minted 9,000 new millionaires, and that growth rate was actually higher than even the US. Now I suspect that the strong peso had a factor in that, because if your assets are in pesos and peso revalues by 25%, you suddenly magically become a dollar millionaire. If you previously had, $800,000 of assets. And then UBS says that there's 29,000 adults in Mexico that have wealth between $5 and $100 million. And that's also growing quite significantly. So even though Mexico, generally speaking, isn't kind of linked to the creation of wealth through the tech space, it is creating a lot of wealth at the million and multi-million dollar level, driven by what I guess is a stable economy, unfortunately very unequal distribution of income, a strong peso, and the fact that Mexican companies, despite all the problems in the country, generally speaking, at least the ones that we have data on, have better profit margins than their counterparts. And in some cases, that's because of lack of competition, which is good for consumers, of course. And in some cases, it's because, they're very efficient and very good at what they do. Now, that wealth is mostly privately held because, as we know, there've been very few IPOs in Mexico, so it's not being piloted through the stock market.
Correct. Yeah, it's good in a way. Wealth is created. The distribution is the key element, I would say, but better to grow one way than not at all. Just one last element from me, Damian. We talked about Cinda last year, the mining company that did the IPO or was going to do the IPO. It actually did it. It raised $213 million, while the private sale to Fresnillo, subsidiary of Peñoles, invested $94 million in the company. The share price sold at $12 a share. The company left a stake of 11.3% in investors' hands, with an additional 5% interest owned now by Fresnillo. The rest of the company is owned, as we talked about it last week, it's owned by Electrum Group, an investment firm that specializes in mining. So, and Cinda has 5 mining concessions in Mexico, around Guanajuato area, mainly closer to San Miguel Allende. I just wanted to wrap up that story that we talked about last week.
And one final thing from me on Mexican millionaires and World Cup ticket prices. I was sent this morning by my daughter the StubHub prices for the Mexico-England game, and also the last 16, and the same StubHub prices for US-Belgium. You can't get tickets anymore on the FIFA website. The sort of worst, roughly speaking, the worst seats in the Estadio Azteca are going for like $3,700, $3,200 on StubHub, and the worst kind of seats are going in Seattle for the US-Belgium game at like $3,000, $3,200. So there's a little premium. These are both countries paying in their home territory, so I think it's a decent like-to-like comparison. There's a little bit of a premium in Mexico, which does underline, that there's plenty of those 333,000 millionaires that are keen to go. Now, it's a much more unifying experience in Mexico going to the World Cup. It's basically the only kind of national sport, let's say, and whereas the US obviously has lots of other sports. So it's a much bigger deal, relatively speaking, here. But it does show that, and I've been reading articles that there's a Mexico premium to tickets throughout the World Cup, and that reflects a passion for the game, but also all these millionaires with money to spend, and it's up to them how to spend it, and they're spending it by going to the Estadio Azteca.
No doubt, it's become a premium sport in a way. Shall we move on to our interview with Rafael?
Yeah. Well, it's a real pleasure to have with us today Rafael García. Rafael is the Vice President of External Relations at TC Energy in Mexico, and he's also President of CanCham Mexico, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Mexico. How are you, Rafa, today?
Very well, Damian. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you both this experience of the new Mexico-Canada chapter of investment and opportunities.
Well, it's our pleasure. So Rafa, his dual hats, I think, gives him a fairly unique view of Mexico's energy infrastructure challenge, Canadian investment in Mexico, and North American integration in general. TC Energy, for those that are not that familiar with it, is one of, if not the largest Canadian investor in Mexico. I think it's invested more than $10 billion here. And CanCham obviously is at the center of the Mexico-Canada business relationship, just as USMCA review is underway. So Rafa, maybe we'll kick off with the easy part. Just tell us a little bit about TC Energy's history in Mexico, its current investment and assets in the country, and how is TC Energy contributing to Mexico's energy security and energy competitiveness?
Perfect, Damian. Thank you. So TC Energy, formerly known as TransCanada, has been in the country like 30 years ago. We are the largest Canadian investor in the country with a little bit more of 11 billion US dollars in the country. We move nearly 30% of the natural gas within Mexico. We have nearly 4,000 kilometers of pipeline. And this is interesting because we have not only onshore pipelines, but offshore pipelines as well. We've finished a very big and important project called SGP Southeast Gateway Project. And together with the other pipeline that we operate, Sur de Texas, Spanish, Sur de Texas, it is the largest offshore gas pipeline in the world. So both of them combined are approximately 1,500 kilometers of pipeline. So this is to be easy, but it is actually very challenging. Just to give you an example of these kind of challenges, for SGP only, we crossed nearly 12,000 fishermen communities. So getting along and to really to internalize these fishermen communities within the project, within TC family, it is a very important aspect. But also here, our footprint, another important gas pipeline is the one that comes from Chihuahua all the way to Sinaloa. It is called El Encino Topolobampo. And this pipeline is important because it gives all the natural gas to the state of Sinaloa. It's important here also to mention that our main customer, not only in Mexico, but company-wide, it is CFE. So CFE, it's the largest off-taker of TC Energy. So that's a big thing, quite a big thing, because it's a long-term commitment. It's a long-term commitment with the Mexican government. As mentioned earlier, with 30 years operating in Mexico, we have operated with all different political parties, PRI, PAN, Morena. That's important because our commitment is with the Mexican state.
On the Southeast Gateway, I read that was done under budget and in less time than was originally planned. Can you confirm that, and how were you able to achieve that, or what were the sort of reasons for that, given that historically, not just in Mexico, but in most parts of the world, infrastructure projects tend to take longer than originally expected and cost more than originally budgeted? That's
exactly right. So a project of these dimensions usually takes longer and costs much higher than original planned. So here in Mexico, the original plan was 4.5 billion US dollars. It ended up with 3.9. That this, if you bring it in net present value, it's around $800 million cheaper. So that's a real gain, not only for TC, but for the Mexican government, because they do not only save this, but it is reflected directly into the tariff. No, it's a lower capex, so it is a lower tariff. And this was achieved thanks to the good relationship that we have with our partner here, that it is CFE Energía, where each of the parties put something to the table. We bring the technology and all the goodwill of how to build this kind of large infrastructures. And second, and they give all the goodwill about speeding all the permits. all the relationship with the communities. So with this political will, it was we were able to do this. We were able to bring this huge capital investment project on time and under budget.
And my understanding is CFE is an equity investor in the project, which was quite an innovative structure at the time.
It is correct. So it's important here because they have skin in the game. So equity participation started with around 14%. And as time goes by, this equity participation gradually increases. I do not remember by heart, but it is around 40-year contract. So SGP is going to end up with around 49% of CFE Energía's equity participation. So yes, it is very innovative, and has served, and it is willing to serve as an example for future investment in development projects in Mexico.
And how will this project help the development in the southeast of Mexico that historically has obviously been underdeveloped versus the north and the center of Mexico, and has lacked, in many cases, kind of basic energy infrastructure?
That's a very good question, Damian, and it is one of these awkwardness of geography and history, because the southeast of Mexico is the one that has the most of oil and natural gas. But most of this oil and natural gas is shifted elsewhere and to export or to the center of the country. So actually, the southeast of Mexico, and particularly the Yucatan Peninsula, has traditionally lacked of natural gas supply. So in Mexico and elsewhere, where you have a natural gas pipeline, it equals to improvement in quality of life. It equals to investment. It equals to bring on more commercial opportunities. So there was a big historical depth of the country with the southeast of Mexico that traditionally has been poorer than the center of the north of Mexico. So with this natural gas pipeline, we're able to bring this development to this part of the country.
Rafa, in that sense, does a company that wants to set up in southern Mexico, could they tap your pipeline, and would CFE agree with that, or is it exclusively for energy purposes to generate electricity?
Thanks, Eduardo. So the natural gas pipeline has 1.3 billion cubic feet per day. So that the larger part is going to be taken by CFE. They are the off-taker. But with this capacity, it's pretty certain that through CFE or through industrial parks to gain of this advantage as well.
Do you see that is shaping up, or is it too early to know?
Well, the project was finished in May 2025. It was finished. Some interconnections are still missing, but it's our understanding that other projects with Mayacan are going on. And many interconnections that were announced by President Sheinbaum a couple of weeks ago, and through Senagas and through CFE Energía, they are going to take place. So yes, we are hearing good news, but things are still developing.
One thing you mentioned that really raised my interest, Rafael, was that you've been able to convince fishery communities to allow you to set up the pipeline. That's been one of the main issues of this type of infrastructures, delaying these infrastructure projects in Mexico. Tell us a little bit of how have you managed, and what sort of energy and I don't know what sort of personnel you use, anthropologists, or how does it work? Because it's not an easy thing to accomplish in Mexico.
It is not, but I'm going to start saying this. Both fishery communities and communities in general and Ejidos, they are very good people. They want to be taken care of. So first of all, we need to identify who are we talking to. So with respect to fisheries communities, which are the ones that are actually have fishing permits, which are legally represented. So we identified from Tuxpan, Alvarado, Coatzacoalcos, all along and Paraíso Tabasco, all along the Gulf pipeline and offshore, which are the ones that will be impacted in a larger sense, hear their necessities, hear how they can be impacted, and internalize them. So we, through CFE Energía, we made a very ambitious social program, bringing them, helping with motors, with boats, with fisheries equipments, nets, but also with longer term projects. With, for instance, develop with the women like oyster harvest, and to bring this kind of projects. So it is a work in progress. So we're bringing new partners here. For instance, we're bringing the PNUD, the United Nations Development Project, to try to bring better practices, to really hear them and get them involved since the beginning.
Okay, fantastic. Congratulations on that. Let me ask you one question before I hand it over to Damian. If CFE is the uptaker of the gas and they are an equity investor, how do you mediate the tariff, the price of the gas? And I know that there are international prices out there that give you probably a framework, a parameter, but what does the contract, how does the contract get settled on the price of the gas and the transportation of the gas as well?
We are paid by a transport tariff. That's it. We're not impacted by the fluctuation of the price, because the owner of the molecule is CFE. Okay. From point A to point B. So it doesn't affect. But also, I wanted to mention, forgot to mention in the former question, in the last question, sorry, about the importance of this development, that our pipelines cross, I think, 14 development poles of Plan Mexico. So these, from your question, Damian, about the development and bringing the investment and social welfare, it's also very important, because we create a lot of synergies with communities, industrial parks, and local and state governments as well.
So, Rafa, the government had underinvested in electricity in the previous 6 years, and now has announced, the new government, same political party, of course, announced a very ambitious kind of energy investment program to catch up. And obviously, energy demand is growing quite fast due to nearshoring, export boom, data center requirements. Do you think Mexico has sufficient energy infrastructure, gas pipelines to meet that planned increase in electricity generation?
Yes, as TC Energía, we're involved more in the transport of a molecule. But what we've heard about other industries and companies that are attracting to this mixed scheme contract, as we did with CFE Energy and TC Energy. So this mixed investment, I think it's important, not only for the generation, but also I've heard a very interesting plan for transmission, because transmission is a natural monopoly from CFE. So trying to know how to think outside the box and bring in investment in transmission and and the combination between transport of a molecule, about power generation and transmission, can help us to solve this matrix of bringing power and electricity to all of these parts of the country as well.
Understood. How do you think that natural gas benefits Mexico? The access to cheap Texan natural gas benefits Mexico, and are you concerned that Mexico is overly dependent on U.S. gas, and that could put in question Mexico's energy sovereignty?
Well, let me start with this, Damian. I think having access to the cheapest natural gas in the world gives Mexico a competitive advantage. I remember well in the 1980s and 1990s, I said, well, Mexico advantage was the cheap cost of labor. Well, this is not the case anymore. The competitive advantage is given by access to these sources of gas. Just to mention an example, the price of BTU at Henry Hub is around $3 per BTU, and in Asia it's $17. In Europe it's $15. So imagine our input for generating electricity is much cheaper. No. Second, about the dependence. No, I think that the dependence here, Damian, and this sovereignty. A country that is sovereign is a country that can actually assure the supply of reliable, cheap, affordable natural gas and sources of energy to its population. Japan doesn't have oil, doesn't have gas, and it's a sovereign nation. So we need to think outside the box about how can we access with long-term contracts and assure this. This without ignoring the fact that Mexico also sits on important basins of natural gas. All the Mexican part of the Eagle Ford that crosses the border, it's also a substantial output of natural gas. And now with the lift of the ban on fracking, it will become a very interesting scenario in the next years. But in the meantime that this is developed, it is important to rely and to keep relying of this good source that we have from the Permian and Eagle Ford here in Mexico.
Rafa, before I jump to your role as president of the Chamber of Commerce of Canada here, do you think Mexico will be able to develop that Permian basis? It doesn't. I mean, the investment capex for that I suppose, is quite large. Requires a lot of confidence in the government, its regulatory framework. What's your outlook for that?
I'm going to give you some interesting information, Edward. First, Mexico as a country has around 20,000 kilometers of natural gas pipeline. Just Texas by itself has 85,000 kilometers of natural gas pipeline. So there is some data that says that Texas has more kilometers of pipeline than of roads. So that's key. No, it is only how you take the natural gas, but where are you going to put it? How are you going to transport it? So it is both of them. No, so fracking, you take out the gas. How you're going to transport it and put it into the mainstream. So it must be combined. So yes, I'm an optimist. I've heard with our upstream friends that there's some appetite to develop this natural gas that's in the shale basins. So it's important not only to rely on our neighbors, Texas, but also on Canada. Canada has a lot of expertise in fracking as well. There are reservoirs similar to the ones that we find in Texas and the north part of Mexico. So how to combine this technology from Texas, but as well, let's look north to our important North American partner that it is Canada.
You've given me the perfect segue to your role as president of the chamber, because that would imply that Canadian investors are looking into Mexico seriously, maybe not just on the energy side of the equation, but on other industries. What can you tell us about the appetite or the willingness or the interest of Canadians investing in Mexico right now?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's a lot about the turmoil that it is causing all the negotiations with the U.S. For Canada, the most important business partner is the U.S. For Mexico, the most important business partner is the U.S. But now, even though that Canada is the third or fourth business partner, for instance, it was recently announced for foreign direct investment, U.S. invested around $10 billion in the first trimester 2026. Canada invested like 900 million. So that is less than 1%. So there's a huge area of opportunity, a huge. Couple of months ago, there was a very large Canadian delegation that came to Mexico looking agribusiness, looking energy, looking mining, looking manufacturing. And as Secretary Ebrard said, it is not an event, it is a strategy. So as part of this strategy, a Mexican delegation of almost 300 companies went to Canada to see how can they find more investment opportunities. So I think this is the first step of many business delegations, but how to land them, how to have a soft landing of this investment to the country. I think that is key, because the differences between both of our countries it's large. But if the Americans figure it out well, I'm pretty sure and certain that the Canadians will as well.
Yeah, you sound optimistic as well on that end. I hope they materialize and that we could be started reporting some investments from from Canadian companies here in Mexico. Any problems that you face within the Mexican government, or that you would like the Mexican government to be more upfront to convince, persuade, cajole those investors to actually, or those investment plans to actually materialize?
Yes, Eduardo, I think here it is important now that companies are operating in Mexico, not to attract investment, but the companies that we are already here, railroad companies, natural gas pipeline companies, mining companies, it is the right of way. The certainty to having larger amounts of political will, legal certainty, a rule of law in this kind of right of way, it is imperative. Today, the government, and it is very respectful, that it wants to give a lot of leverage to the different communities. That is important. We respect that. And at the beginning of this interview, I mentioned that communities, both ejidos, fishermen communities, and land communities, are good communities. But what happens that there are many times external factors, external actors that are interfering with this, and we as private companies need more legal certainty and rule of law for having this kind of investments. And this is transversal to all linear infrastructure companies.
Rafa, natural gas is clearly cleaner than combustible or than fuel. In the refinery in Tula, a lot of pollution has contributed to air quality problems in Mexico. In some cases, contributed to roads, to cars being taken off the road. What needs to be done to convert something like Tula to natural gas and reduce the air emissions?
Well, Damian, this is a national priority. President Sheinbaum has mentioned this, that in order to help to all of us that live in the Valley of Mexico City to transform and to convert this fuel oil power plant of CFE into natural gas. So we have a project called TVDR, that is Tula Villa de Reyes, that it has been 8, almost 9 years since we haven't gained access. And it is a gap of around 8 kilometers, more or less. And this is because there are many external actors that have prohibited that we have a step forward here. No, unlike on past administrations, we believe that we are now moving forward. We've have good conversations with federal government, but also with state and local government, but also with the legislative. They understand this. They understand the importance of sending the correct messages. I don't have the figures right now, Damon, but I can provide them further in a further conversation about all the investment that has been lost because of the right-of-way. And we're only 8 kilometers away, 8 kilometers of really changing the life of all the people that live here in the Mexico City Valley.
So why would they be, it's 8 kilometers, why would they be against this? What are the vested interests that have stopped this happening over the last 8 years?
Well, there are many hypotheses. None of them, I can assure you which one is certain. But we have had, since a lot of years ago, many amparos that prevent us. Amparos are injunctions that prevent us to talk directly with the communities. So without creating this dialogue, it is difficult. And the communities, what we want is to talk to them, to talk really with the communities and not with intermediaries. No? So it is important for us to establish this dialogue.
Terrific. Well, Rafa, thank you so much for coming on the Mex Moves podcast and sharing your views and your knowledge on the energy infrastructure sector and on CanCham in Mexico. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Damian, Edward. Thank you very much, and happy to solve any questions that you might have. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. This was our latest episode of Mex Moves. We'll hope to join us back next week. Please review us, comment, share us. We hope you enjoyed it.